Turumbático. Te lo dije. A ti nada más.
Ja, goedemiddag. Goedemiddag, mijn naam is Ira Kip. Ik ben de host van de talkshow van vandaag. Welkom. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. My name is Ira Kip. I'm the host of the talk show of today. Everybody that's watching online, welcome. We are here in the Sachet Theater in the city, in the heart of Breda, where we are having a talk that is surrounded around the conversation, the theme, the Black Lives Matter movement, and how art can actually be a call for change. BredaPhoto has organized these talks so that we can have a deeper understanding and conversation about the work that's actually being shown in the festival. So thank you for having me. Thank you for watching, everybody that's here live and everybody that's watching online. Today at the table, I have with me Dandelion Egosha. We were just talking about how to pronounce her name correctly, so I've been practicing that. And she told me to say egg Gosha, but feel free to tell me if I'm doing it wrong. Dandelion is a non-binary visual and multidisciplinary artist whose work reflects the everyday life and marginalized identities of the Afro-LGBTQ community. Egosha's project, Unspoken Rudiments, and the Is This a Woman, is shown here at the BredaPhoto Festival. Egosha's work has been shown on various podiums in Nigeria, South Africa, and also in Zimbabwe. Welcome.
Thank you. Actually, it's Dandelion Egosa.
Thank you. Thank you for correcting me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I want to thank you because also we were supposed to have another guest here, and you were so kind to step in and join this conversation.
Yeah.
So thank you. Yeah. Online with us, we have two amazing artists, one who's based in New York at the moment, and one who's in Curacao. Streaming with us live, Kevin Osepa. Kevin, welcome. Kevin is a visual artist born and raised in Curacao and is now based in the Netherlands, but because of Corona, I think you got stuck in Curacao, am I correct?
No, because of Corona, I needed to start a project in March to July, and it needed to be presented at BredaPhoto this year. But due to the coronavirus, I couldn't travel, and now I had the opportunity to travel, so now I'm on the island working, creating the work.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. Kevin's work focuses on the identity of the Afro-Caribbean people in a post-colonial world. Within his work, he attempts to sketch this identity and the stories he tells, often in a very personal way, and always aiming at the collective of the Afro-Caribbean identity. So, Kevin, again, thank you for being here and welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
We also are joined by the amazing artist Adreinne Waheed, who's actually the poster that everybody has been seeing of BredaPhoto is an image of Adrienne's book, Black Joy and Resistance. We'll get into that later, but Adreinne has photographed since the age of 13. Her work has been published in different publications, the New York Times, Vadar. She is above all a collector of images, both of images that she took herself and images that she archives. Adreinne, you too, thank you so much for being here. I have so many questions, but I was so proud to see your work when I was turning the corner coming from the train station and I saw your picture. And I was so proud to see it because we met a year ago or a little over a year ago.
Yes,
and we actually had the conversation about how can we have the people in the Netherlands see your work.
Absolutely,
So
and I'm so happy to be a part of this photo festival. I just wish I could be there in person to see it myself.
I know. Well, thank you so much for joining us online. My name is Ira Kip. I'm a theater artist, and I was invited to host this talk because my work is inspired and also mirrors the work that all of these guests here investigate. I wrote a play in 2016 that is called Through Her. And with Through Her, we wanted to investigate how our queer identity moves through the space in today's time. In 2015, Obama signed the law for marriage equality, and the question that came up for me was, what do you win when you become part of a system or an institution? Here's a short clip of Through Her.
Ze waren er altijd al. Soms in stilte, soms onhoorbaar luid. Verscholen in de coulissen. Een regisseur, ja zij, bedenkt een veilige plek.
Niet alleen voor de spelers, maar ook voor het publiek. Dus dat je samen onderdeel wordt van een geheel. Dat je samen gaat nadenken over, oké, wat betekent dat dan?
Ready for a wedding.
Het huwelijk en de tradities die we hebben.
Hij geeft 5 gewone mensen,
Genderfluid, cis, trans,
5 queer vrouwen,
masculine, butch, boy.
een stuk om op te kauwen.
En wil ik me ook echt dan papi voelen. Ja!
Shakespeare, het temmen van de fakes.
Het is een beetje hachelijk.
Maar op zo'n manier dat ze zichzelf erin herkennen.
That is just a short clip of the play. The play premiered in 2017 and had a run all the way till 2020, right before the pandemic happened. I asked my actors the question, does it mean when you become part of a system or an institution? And in this case, we wanted to investigate marriage equality, but in a more broader and universal sense, we also wanted to ask that question, what does it mean when you do have a seat at the table? And is this table even for us? And shouldn't we find new forms, new traditions that actually work for a community and that are not rooted in an institutional system? So that work premiered. We had a tour throughout the Netherlands, and then in 2019 we actually had the privilege to travel to Curacao and Suriname to show the play. And what was interesting is how the context of the question shifted. Curacao being an island, Dutch island for that, with a very different history and a very different LGBTQ community, I would say in my experience more conservative. Once we performed the play, we were very interested to see how the audience would respond. And it was a very interesting conversation to have with the audience as well, whereas in the Netherlands, it was a queer LGBTQ play, and the audience was very engaged, and we could notice that in Curacao, the audience engaged differently to the question and to what they actually saw on stage. The beautiful thing that did happen in Curacao is that for the first time, people actually got to witness their personal stories on stage, which they had never seen before. So with that, Kevin, I actually want to start with you. You being from Curacao, born and raised, the work that you make, could you speak a little bit about how the people in Curacao specifically respond to your art?
Well, I deal with a lot of topics that here are considered a bit taboo. For example, spirituality. I speak a lot about spirituality in my work, but also queer identity plays a role. I challenge masculinity. And it's very interesting to respond because I tend to feel, because it's in this art form and it's more abstract in a way, the conversation starts very light. And I feel like it opens a lot of conversations, not only with my family, but people that witness the work. So it triggers this sort of interest in something that we usually don't speak about, and I really enjoy that when I present my work here or have a conversation about my work on the island.
And when you say it triggers the interest, who are these people? Are we talking about a more younger generation on Curacao, or would you say it's a variety of generations?
I mean, with both of the generations, it's different. For example, the younger generation, when it comes to like spirituality, they're not very involved. But these are stuff that I grew up with when I was younger. But there's this tendency that, for example, my grandmother, she would tell me, "Don't do this," or "Use this to shower with this," but she wouldn't tell me why. Um, so when you grow up, you just know that you need to do something, but it's dying down.
Right.
And what I find interesting is that everybody has this history, but they're not busy with it. So having the conversation with the younger generation, it sparks this aha moment. And with people like, for example, my mother and my grandmother, the conversation is very different because they warn me of certain things, but they give me also more knowledge. And it also gives them a different perspective on how important it is to give this to the next generation.
Right. And would you say that the spaces that your work is presented in Curacao, do they feel like safe spaces for your work and for you?
Not, no, not necessarily. I have a very I'm very aware when I'm presenting my work on the island because it's sometimes it can be very confronting, and I have difficulty with that. I think as a young artist, but I feel that it's necessary. So the necessity always thrives, I think. So I always present the work, but I'm always very nervous of how it's going to be received and what type of conversation it sparks and what position it puts me in as an artist and as a person.
Yeah, yeah. We have a short trailer of your work, and help me with the pronunciation. Watamula.
Yes, perfect.
Uh, I know what mula means, but can you translate it for us, and also the definition of Watamula?
Guatemala is a place on the westmost side of the island. It's like a water hole, and they say that it's where the island breathes. So it's like a big hole, and the water flows through it, and it's a very important place for the island. And I found it very beautiful to have that as the final journey of the main character.
Awesome. So we're going to watch a short clip of your work.
Viaje aqui. Não vai estar fácil. Você vai enfrentar a realidade e vou caminhar. Você está forte.
E água tá cai.
I actually see some familiar faces in the trailer. Can you tell us about the process of making this work?
It was a very scary process, crazy process, because I come from a photography background, and usually I work alone. So it's me and my camera, me and my family, people that I feel safe with, or friends and friends of friends. But for Watamula, it being a short film of 25 minutes, I needed to have a crew. I worked suddenly with a crew of more than 16 people. So it puts me in a very different position as my other work. Um, so the decisions needed to be made quick and also for other people. And I found it a very interesting way of speaking, but it was working. I'm sorry, but it was a very nice experience because I worked with a cinematographer who really understood the fact that I don't speak the cinematography language. So he helped me translate everything for the crew. So I would explain, for example, I wouldn't say pan the camera. I would say, oh, make the camera move like this. And he would translate it to the lighting department, to the audio department. So it was a very beautiful collaborative experience.
And you just explained to us that Watamula is a very important place for us on Curacao. It also has, in my experience, a very spiritual energy. What is the story that you wanted to tell with this piece?
Well, it was. I feel like the island deserves for us to see ourselves in a different way, and also when it comes to critique within, because I predominantly work in Europe, but presenting the work there is a very different because it also I also give critique within the work. And it was important for me to, as a black man, to have that conversation within the black community. So it's me having a conversation, and everybody for me in Europe is witnessing me having this conversation. So I wanted to create a place where there was no judgment. And spirituality also plays a role. It's a different, I see it as a code of a way to communicate that, for example, if someone that doesn't have this background doesn't necessarily understand what's going on, but it's a language that I can use to communicate something with people from the island. So I use those cues actually in this movie to communicate my personal feeling and my personal struggles when it comes to acceptance.
That's the next question I had, because you're speaking about the conversation that you wanted us to have in the community. The thought that came up for me is, what is this conversation that you want us in the community to have? You're explaining identity and how we look at ourselves. But what is the ask of the people that you're actually having this conversation with?
It's about acceptance. Living in the Netherlands as a black man growing up in Curacao and moving to the Netherlands when I was 17, I suddenly knew what racism was in a very harsh way. So acceptance became part of my life, looking for acceptance, not feeling accepted. But feeling comfortable with my queer identity, but going back to the island, I didn't feel that part of my identity was accepted. So in a way, I feel like I'm stuck in the middle of the Atlantic, I would say, and that neither of these places feel like home, because somewhere my skin color is an issue, and also my sexuality, and then going back to the island, my sexuality is an issue. So it's a constant struggle, and it's also on the level of, for example, the whole community, how I experience, but also within my family. So it's a very small conversation, but I use a small conversation to amplify the how I feel,
Right.
and how other people feel.
And do you notice a difference in how the audience in the Netherlands is responding to your work versus the audience in Curacao?
Yes, the conversation goes further when it comes to an audience that has this background, this cultural background, for example, because then we can really go to the nitty gritty. And for people in Europe that doesn't necessarily have this, it becomes more what do you say? It's a learning experience. So for them, it's an introduction to a culture that they didn't know about. But I also use my work to speak about colonialism and post-colonialism, also within the Dutch context, seeing that things like Golden Age are getting glorified. And I also like to speak about like traumas that are still, for example, on the island. And these are severe colonial traumas that shapeshift, and people don't really necessarily recognize. So it's a way for me to give a better understanding of the Dutch Antilles community in the Netherlands.
Right. So I actually wanted to shift to Dandelion, but kind of banking on what you just said, Kevin, because Dandelion and I had a conversation before we just met each other. And before the talk started, we had an interesting conversation about how you are experiencing racism differently, being in the Netherlands, growing up in Nigeria, coming to Europe. This is your first time here. You've been here for 2 months now. And I ask you, is there a Black Lives Matter movement? I was thinking the same thing about this question in the context of Curacao as well. George Floyd happened. We're all talking about it right now. But when you come from a place like Nigeria, what is the climate like in terms of the movement that's happening right now?
So let me just say that I've not been to Nigeria for months. Like, I left Nigeria way before the George Floyd thing happened, because I had to be in Ghana for a while. But honestly, there are no protests regarding Black Lives Matter happening in that environment because of how the people have been conditioned to navigate their problems. People do not pick up placards and go into the streets for specifically Black Lives Matter, but like other protests happen in other ways through their arts, and protests regarding violence against women, rape, mutilation, and those sort of conversations happen. very often in that environment, of course. But through the arts more, I would say it's where statements are being made in an environment where people have been conditioned to be fearful. There are only a number of ways you can imagine freedom. You know, even if you can't pick up placards and go into the streets, you have to find creative ways to go about it. And I'm in constant awe about how my people actually navigate it, because they keep coming up with creative ways to actually, talk about these problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your work is shown here at the festival. Can you tell us a little bit about the process, what it is that you wanted to tell, what's the story that you wanted to tell with the work, and why it is that you wanted your work to be showcased here, specifically in Breda, but also in Europe?
So first of all, my work is mostly about documenting LGBTQ people in Africa, and to talk about the basic ways that we navigate queerness in an environment, like I said, where there are policies that make it difficult to be yourself. It's This just happened in a time where it was supposed to happen. This is the first time I'm showing in Europe, and I think that time was ripe to bring the conversation further to this world. Also because even till now, when I have a conversation with other people that I have met here, like other artists, they still find it news that there are many people in the world who cannot love the way they want to love, and then there are many people who cannot be themselves the way they should be, because there's literally a 14-year jail sentence. And that's hard, you know. So I think firstly, the work is about navigating queerness in being African and being in that environment. The work is about navigating queerness and who do we become in navigating queerness? Like, there's definitely trauma involved in and violence. Like, what's the furthest way to learn yourself? How do you imagine freedom in an environment where you're constantly being bombarded by these policies that say, yes, don't do this, don't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's sort of also like a celebration of life,
Right.
Celebrating the life that we live that has not killed us. When I was creating this work, I curated it in Ghana with some of my new friends. And the process was actually really interesting. We came together and we just danced, and they didn't have to, be in a particular position. I didn't have to ask them to pose in a particular kind of way, and it came so naturally. Because having safe spaces, like really genuine safe spaces in that environment, is something so precious as well. And I think that's the summary of what the work is about.
Yeah. So, is this a woman? You created that. Did the environment, because you were creating it in Ghana, would it be different if you had created it in Nigeria?
Okay, so let me just say that this is the second part of this
Right.
series. The first part showed in Nigeria, and that was a censored version of the exhibition.
And why was it censored?
So, like I said, being queer in a space like that, the discrimination cuts across not just not being able to love in the streets, public display of affection. If you're an artist, a queer artist working in that environment, you also have to deal with having organizations who do not want to be affiliated with you because of their image. Sometimes you work on films and projects that should be, something to be loud about, and people tell you, oh no, don't put my name there because I don't want to be affiliated. But I think it's kind of also inspired me to push for more. So when the first part showed in Nigeria for my solo exhibition, it was censored, and a lot of the uncensored beats weren't accepted because, of course, people want to be quiet about it. People want to have these conversations, but they want to be hush-hush about it. You can have these conversations, but don't be too loud about it. So I think that's another reason why showing in Europe is actually very special for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was censored, but were you able to still control what was shown and what wasn't?
Yes and no, in a way. I think that half the time the galleries just, or the organizations pick what suits them best, and that's kind of really hard, where even though it's not uncensored, where the most important bits should be shown, like love, people loving, like people kissing, people just being themselves. People don't want to see that. So, yeah, it's it's a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, we have a short clip
Yeah.
that we can watch.
Where the setting sun summons us, there we lie, forcing our way into places beyond our reach, like desert termites. Clenched fists, walls, turns and twists, lust. We, who hide our hearts beneath the salty belly of unconquerable waters, far away from demons, sleep, and thieves. Where love calls for us, there we lie, potters of love and death, with faces gracelessly adorned with all the lives we've lived. We take the earth's bounty. When God made us, she sang. On her studio floor, there we lie, formless, marked, masters of the deep, numberless. Like stars, there's fire shut up in our bones. Under the moonless sky, we are ferrymen journeying in Stygian darkness, bare-chested, with our dead daughters, mothers, sisters, and their dead strapped on our hunchbacks. Where you hear ghosts and women appear, there we lie. The sacrifices of our love surpass what the blood of goats and lambs can do. What law, what season, what space, what creature, what material made in heaven and earth can separate us? What song, what dream, what river? There's a cry in the darkness. She's wearing a red dress. Her hair is a jungle and she knows my name. She has reached out for me in pitch black, and the only sound in the room is my heart coming alive. Her taste is familiar. My body remembers her arms. My life is starting on her kitchen table. She's bleeding into my drinking glass, and this place looks like my mother's house. She's wiping my tears with her mouth, heavy, but she carries me with the sorrow in her eyes, and her words are forming swords in me. She takes my hands in hers, and we are falling into a dream, so fast, into beams of color. When the setting sun summons me, I will go, but for now, there's no place I'd rather be.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process of making this film?
Okay, so this is a rendition. It's an opening to the main film. The film is titled Ahoy Moegbe in my language. Ahoy Moegbe means love. And I went back home to ask the women in my community what love meant to them. But the interesting thing is that these were women who did not have a chance to choose in love. They were literally bundled as little girls on their father's bikes and just taken to the men who they were meant to be married to and just given away, you know. They didn't have a choice to choose. And many of these women I grew up with in church, I think the question in my mind was, what would love mean to this set of people who did not have a chance to choose their partners, who had to just figure it out? What would love mean to a woman who only knows how to sacrifice herself? What would love mean to a woman who has to constantly come up with ways to imagine freedom? Like, because it was heavy work for me. Also, just going home and talking to these women. If you know the Nigerian culture, it's hard for you to have an emotional conversation with older people older than you, or people who raised you. And these people literally raised me. So going back to ask them, what does love mean to you, was sort of scary, because not many of them even knew what love meant to them.
Or had never been asked.
Or had never been asked the question before.
Yeah.
So many of them just said it the way they knew how to navigate it. And it was valid as well. And it kind of brought me further. But like also when I was writing this rendition, I thought about all the women in my lives. I thought about all the women I knew. I thought about all the women who raised me. I thought about my mother's kitchen, and it was always like a mini cult for me, you know, where women gather in the kitchen. And if the culture of women is to be in the kitchen always, like they tell you in Nigeria, it's still something that is said often, a girl's place is in the kitchen. But like that has become sort of like a very powerful, a girl's place in the kitchen, but you don't know what she's cooking in the kitchen, you know.
But at the same time, the kitchen is our safest space.
Yeah,
actually,
it's sort of like
it
became like a cult, a coven.
Right.
So all of it's layers of emotions and queerness as well. And every time I actually hearing this, because I've actually not heard this since. I just made it. I couldn't show this in Nigeria actually because it was like a conversation we're just having. This is not accepted where I'm from. It's too raw, you know. Nobody wants to see a woman with naked breasts on their screen. So I literally had to make the effort of not showing it. I literally had to hide it, even though it was not work that was meant to be hidden. But I think that this process kind of have brought me further. It's an ongoing series. This particular work is sort of like a lifelong, it's going to be lifelong. These are women, the main film, maybe some of you have seen it, maybe some of you would see it, maybe some of you are interested in seeing it and haven't. But they are majorly older women, like I said. And in a few years from now, as the work progresses, many of those women are not going to be alive anymore. Right. So this is sort of like also archival work, just to document their lives, their stories, and where they are coming from as well.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Also, the idea of documenting a generation that is not going to be with us for a long time.
Yeah.
And then for us as young artists to be able to always tap into that.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful. Speaking of love, I want to talk about Black joy and resistance. And just when I said that, I lost Adreinne on the screen.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Did you hear the last thing that I said?
No.
I was trying to make a transition into love, and then I said your name.
And then my computer just
Yes.
went.
But I still felt the love. Thank you so much, Adreinne, for being here. We actually wanted to start, before I start asking you questions, I think the people in the back actually have a photo of your work outside.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Nice.
That is
Very
beautiful, right?
Yeah.
So it made me so proud, not just because we know each other, but the conversation of Black joy. You and I, we did an interview with you a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about what does Black joy actually mean. And then also, you shared with me the idea of we never really said that before until a few years ago. So I'm wondering, do you think Black joy has also changed from when we first starting, when it first became trending to say it on the internet, in relation to your book as well? And now looking, your book was created in 2017. We're now 3 years ahead. Has that
2018.
morphed into another form of Black joy?
Right. Well, I think that Black joy is something that Black folks have embodied in, since the beginning of time, and we've used that as a form of resistance in everything that we do, in the style and the dress. And I think that just right now it's so important because of just the political climate, especially here in the US. And so, after the killing of George Floyd, and after, there's been so many senseless killings, but the killing of George Floyd created this even bigger movement that shined a light more so on Black joy, sort of as a form of almost self-care, as a sort of active practice, every day. For instance, when we see all of these images of the Black body being killed, being, abused, that can really affect our psyche. And so I think that as the sort of opposite of that, to sort of help us heal, we have to embody Black joy. And I think that's why it's become more popular. And I guess in that way, it has evolved as sort of this bigger idea. People are actually making the connection between Black joy and resistance, and understanding that when there's all kind of outside forces trying to persecute you and hold you down, that you from the inside out, figure out how to embrace your own joy. And that is sort of a way to resist everything else that's kind of coming at you from the outside.
Right. One thing that you just said, which I saw a quote the other day that said, it's not normal to see Black people being killed on the internet daily.
Yeah.
So how all these images online are affecting our psyche. And so where do we go with that, right? Or what's the effect, what's the long-term effect of all this information? And how do we navigate through that space? What is that for you with all the images that we see in the media and we see every day coming through our feed? How can one still tap into that joy when we're being overwhelmed with so much of our trauma?
Right. So I think part of it, and part of that self-care, is to know when to tap out, to know when, we've seen enough. We have to, even whether it's taking a fast from social media, whether it's embracing your community and your loved ones that much tighter, finding where your joy is. Where does your joy lie? From the smallest thing to the biggest thing. It might be a simple video of a cute baby that gets you giggling, and and you can tap into that feeling and maybe help that carry you through. And then for a longer term sort of solution, you have to get together with your community and make active steps towards maintaining your joy. And I think that's the best that you can do. I mean, we're in a time where the news cycle and where the world is just filled with so much pain and so much angst that we have to use Black joy as an active practice, and you got to tap into that, whether that's meditating in the morning, whether that's tapping into some sort of spirituality for yourself. You have to find it and hold on to it and approach everything that you do, even your resistance, somehow with that joy inside of your heart, you know, because we are still alive here to fight on and figure out how to push forward even in times of darkness.
Right. It almost has to become some sort of religion, a daily practice for us to tap into, just to create that space in our brains and in our hearts and in our energy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why did you want to create this photo book?
Well, I've been shooting since I was 13 years old, so it's a long time now. And I just felt like after having a career in photo editing and behind the scenes and magazines and stuff, I wanted to really show the world my work, you know, because I felt like I had been sort of playing small by not playing up my own photography, and I felt like I had something to offer to the world. And so when I looked at that and I thought about what I love to shoot, which is Black folks, and I started to gather these images together, and it just spoke to me in a way that said Black joy. And I thought, you know, it's important for me to put this out. And I decided to self-publish because I had friends of mine who had books that they tried to shop to different publishers, only to be told that there was no market for it, only to be told that, you know, only to be denied. And so I figured I'm not going to do that. I'm going to publish it myself. I'm going to maintain control of it, and I'm going to, you know, do it my way and make that investment in myself. And so it really was just kind of about putting my work out there in order to join the conversation.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you did that independently, but now the work is shown here at BredaPhoto. It's reaching a larger audience, which I think is really beautiful. What do you think, and I actually want to open up the conversation, and Kevin, I'll start with you. What do you think the role of the artist is in today's climate? And then also, if you could speak a little bit about your work, Clove, that you're working on right now, which Clove translated in English is gap. I'm not sure if, I was trying to look for the synopsis or another meaning of that word, but Kevin,
Tunnel?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Like a tunnel, maybe?
Right. So could you speak a little bit on why you wanted to create, or why you're creating Clove, and also your role as an artist in today's climate in relation to this work?
Yes, I think my work as an artist, my position is really, what I try to do is giving my perspective on a conversation, and just give life into the conversation that is not maybe a book or a text, just a different artistic approach. I think that's very important because you keep the conversation going, and that's what I know and I can do best is creating. And one thing that I want to say that is very important, and this is for all artists, is you need to be very aware of your position when you're creating a work. And oftentimes I see exhibition of artists that ignore the fact that their position with their work can also be very problematic when they're dealing with something. So I would love to give that message out there. So for artists, if you're established, to look really critically at your position within your work. So for the Clove project, it's a place. It's like this road that is 300 meters long, and the trees grow towards each other. It's this street. And growing up, when I go to the beach with my father, this is this road that you always drive through. But as a young kid, it was very scary because there's a lot of like ghost stories, and accidents and stuff that happened there. So the population of Curacao, they really have a relationship with this space. So now I'm researching the place, and if you look at the history, this was a place that had a lot of battles with enslaved people. A lot of enslaved people died at this place. So this colonial trauma created these more contemporary ghost stories that exist to this day that people are still struggling with. And now interviewing people, for example, I'm still amazed how many people, older people, 60 plus, that tell me that they take a different route for them to not drive through that space because of things that they've experienced and because of things that they've heard. So I'm very interested in how like this colonial trauma created this new trauma and that still lives on today. And I find it very important to present this work in the Netherlands, which was colonized by the Netherlands, and that created this trauma. And when we're speaking about the golden age, and when we're speaking about how rich the Netherlands was in the times, we also need to look critically at this history and what it left that was bad, and how people to this day are struggling with that
It's so
in what
beautiful. I
form.
turned to look at the image and I immediately recognized it and felt that energy because I know what it is like driving through that street and what happens to your body, and especially when you have the windows down and you're feeling the wind and the warmth of the islands. You can actually really feel your ancestors almost being present in that space. And it's also the road that goes to Westpunt, which is the end of the island, right? So it's also, you're actually traveling all the way to the last part of the island. And like you said, a lot of slaves have died there. A lot of slaves tried to escape the plantations and were roaming around in that area. So that's beautiful. I looked over my shoulder and I actually could feel that being in that space and what that does.
Yeah,
Um,
working on this, because I deal with spirituality a lot in my work, but it was always about the idea of spirituality, or having a conversation and translating that into an image. And I created this sort of, how do you say, a protection for myself to be a little bit sober when I'm working. But with this project actually being there, driving there, going there to take pictures, it's really intense. I've never experienced this. I've noticed that I'm very sensitive to whatever is there. So I'm very curious to see what that is also going to do with the work that I'm creating. How this energy that I feel like I need to protect myself from is going to, what is going to do with the work.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Also for you, Dandelion, and also for Adreinne, I asked the question, what is the role of us as artists? Adreinne, I'm interested in hearing from you the differences in generations. If you look at the younger generation of artists that are now creating work, do you see a difference in specifically in these topics of identity and our post-colonial history and white supremacy and this anti-racist movement conversation that we're in? Do you
Yeah.
feel?
Well, I think that the younger artists have, in some ways, benefited from the sacrifices and strides made by generations before. I think that they are more inclined to express themselves in whatever ways they see fit. And of course, I'm coming from the perspective of US. You know, I know what Dandelion said about the challenges of Nigeria. But just speaking from, like, you know, being in the US and being born and raised here, I think that the younger artists have this sort of sense of entitlement in a way that is a good thing. They feel entitled to a seat at the table, and they're also more inclined to create their own table and invite who they want, you know, to that table. And I think that that's progress.
And what is that like for you?
Um,
So right before we started the talk, I also asked you the question, what do you think our responsibility is as artists these days, the climate? How do you respond to that in your art?
so I believe that liberation in part is a storytelling process, and being able to tell stories irrespective of how you're telling them, whether you're telling them visually, orally, whether you're telling them in ways that are even yet to be called art yet. It's valid. And it's progressive, you know. I feel like really it's how do I put it? It's, you know, it's a process of learning oneself and digging deep as well. There's something Kevin said about spirituality that I really resonated with. Being here and like being having to call myself an artist, I feel like the spirituality bit is also like a part that can be easily ignored as well. But healing and navigating the trauma as well is, how do I put it? It's an ongoing thing.
It's an ongoing process.
It's an ongoing. It's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You also said that your work is liberating or feels liberating to you. I have that when I look at Adrienne's work, and I felt that when I just looked at Kevin's images. And being in the time that we are, where we were just speaking about being so overloaded with all this trauma, finding work that is actually liberating and creating that space for us to breathe through the trauma. Last question, is there any work right now that you have seen from an artist that you feel like that's your go-to object, art piece that gives you that feeling of liberation and freedom and space in these times that we live in? Adreinne?
Well, I've been on the front lines at a lot of the protests that have been going on in the U.S. right now. And it's been a sort of a healing and a cathartic process for me. And I consider myself a visual activist in a way when I'm out there. It's soul stirring to be out there, raising my voice, demanding change. And so some of the artists, the photographers that are there in the streets with me, they're actually inspiring me. Their work actually inspires my work, and I think that we inspire each other. And it's more than it's art, but it's also art and activism at the same time. And so I've been really inspired this summer by just being out there on the front lines and capturing a movement and standing in solidarity with not only just the other artists, but with the activists and the protesters who are out trying to create change. And so that's really where I am right now in terms of my inspiration at this moment.
That's beautiful. Kevin, how is that for you?
For me, it's a bit different. I think it's in a way what Adreinne said about like looking for Black joy also in these heavy times. Someone that I'm very inspired by is Grace Jones, and there's this documentary called Blood, Light, and Bammy, and that shook me to the core because it was very beautiful seeing like her artistic life in Paris in contrast to her life with her family in Jamaica, and me coming from the Caribbean and working in Europe. It's a very different dynamic, and also see how humble she is and but how extravagant in herself she can be, and that really, and that it has its struggles, but it's not heavy every time. I that inspires me a lot, so I would also recommend everybody to watch it.
The Grace Jones documentary.
Blood, Light, and Bammy.
And what is your inspiration these days, or what is that one thing that you can escape to in these trying times?
So for inspiration, it's a number of things, but it's mostly releasing what I gather through everyday life or just over the course of my life. It can be in small and little ways, but it's mostly about releasing what I gather. But a lot of people inspire me as well. Just a lot of young artists where I'm from, people that I see constantly pushing boundaries and bringing conversations to like the forefront, conversations that people are not comfortable with having. I think that being alive at this time in the world where a lot of things are shifting, it couldn't have come at a better time, and like the madness of the world as well. Like, yeah, I think that it's in layers, but yeah, there's inspiration definitely everywhere.
Yeah. We're almost through our time. Thank you, all three of you, so much for sharing your work and your stories. You inspire my work. You inspire me. If I can answer that question myself, just doing the research on your work has given me so much inspiration, and also to know that there's so many other great queer artists out there creating work that I can see myself in. So thank you for that. I also want to leave us with, we live in an interesting time where the pandemic has really forced us to sit still. And for me, it has, I started wondering about the question, so what do I have to say now? I had all these ideas and these projects that I was going to produce, but then the pandemic happened and I actually had to sit still. So as an artist, even though the world around us is on fire in some places, literally, the stillness has also caused me specifically, to reflect on everything. And where I have found solace in is community, even though it has to be at social distance sometimes, but coming together with friends and family and in conversations like this actually inspire and create space for us to still be here and experience some of that love that you talk about in your work. So thank you, Kevin in Curacao. Pasa bon dia. Tabata un gran placer. I hope we get to meet in person very soon. Adreinne, I'm going to be in New York soon, so we'll see each other hopefully. Dandelion, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
BredaPhoto, thank you. BredaPhoto viewers, everybody that's watching online, thank you for watching our talk show for today. There's a talk show happening next week as well. The theme is China. I advise you to look on the website of BredaPhoto for all the information. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Surumbático. Ok. Bueno, chao.